Hello everyone. It is the end of the year. It's December 26th. It's going to be December 27th pretty soon. So, I'm going to do my top 10 and I'm going to do a top 10 and a top 15 list, but I read way more good books than bad books this year, so I'm doing my 10 least favorite, most disappointing books of 2020. So far, I don't have a single thumbs down on any of my videos, and I expect this video to change that. Future editing Jake here with the temporary return of Squeaks McChair. I forgot to set out kind of the rules for this. We're not doing any rereads for this. It'll all be books I read for the first time. That will also be true for my top list. And also, I don't have any limits on what author it is. Like, we can have the same author multiple times. Same thing for the top list. If you're good enough to be in my top 15 multiple times, then you're in there. And same thing for if you wrote enough books I didn't like. Anyway, let's get into the list. When there's hunger, you don't share out your food. You just devour the weakest ones. This practice works among wolves, since it lets the healthiest and strongest individuals survive. But among sentient races, selection of that kind usually allows the biggest bastards to survive and dominate the rest. So, the number 10 spot on this, we're just going straight in. Actually, I'm going to start with a disclaimer that I didn't read 10 bad books this year. In fact, I didn't even read 10 books I dislike. I think I probably read like 4. So the first few on this, I kind of liked with a lot of asterisks, but had serious issues with. And number 10 is going to be Baptism of Fire. And the biggest issue I have with Baptism of Fire is I can remember like 2 things that happened in this book. Like all the other books I read this time of the year, I can tell you what happened. Like, it's been longer since I read Knife of Dreams, and I told you this, and I can tell you basically the entire plot of Knife of Dreams, and it's like 3 Baptisms of Fires. It has a vampire? The ending made me laugh. Basically, so my actual problem I had with Baptism of Fire was just the lack of progress in the plot. Where it just really feels like Geralt spinning his wheels. He does eventually make the progress by the end. Like, it's not like nothing happens in the entire book and he's spinning his wheels for the entire book, but he's spinning his wheels for that, and he's not really getting anywhere. And also, what the problem a lot of the later Witcher books has that stopped me from liking them more is when they're following Geralt or Ciri, it's 2 thumbs up, or Dandelion or Jaskier, whatever you want to call them. When they're following those characters, oh, hi, Vin. It's like, yeah, thumbs up, but anyone else, and I just don't care. And this was the least eventful, Witcher book, and I don't remember what happened in it other than, 3 events. Like, it was maybe more than 3, but if you told me to give a synopsis of Baptism of Fire, man, I would struggle. This story, it's just not that much progress was made, except for the very beginning and then the very end, and everything else in the middle just anyway. So I gave this 6 out of 10. At the time of reading it, it was my least favorite book in The Witcher. There will be one more a little bit higher up that you will see, though. But overall, I don't think any Witcher books were bad. I also don't think any Witcher books were fantastic. They all ranged from okay to good. None of them are better than good. None of them are worse than okay. I think overall, if this is one of the worst books in your series, it's not bad, because it's not actually a bad book. And a lot of people really like it, but it's a very forgettable book to me. The vampire's great, though.
"You ain't no nice guy," she cried at him as he went into the living room. "I only went with you because I thought you were a nice guy."
Oh, my number 9 least favorite book of the year, and probably due to expectations, probably my second or third most disappointing, because I had higher expectations for this than most of the other books on this list, probably except for number 4. And that's The Stand by Stephen King, which many people favorite book of all time. I know Brian Lee Durfee put out a video for his favorite books, and this is his favorite book of all time. And it was my first ever Stephen King book, and yeah, maybe reading a, 480,000 word book as my first Stephen King book was a mistake. But I just, thought it was kind of okay throughout the entire thing. It shined in a couple ways, the characters definitely feel distinctive. So if all you care about is characterization, then and premise, then I guess it's good. But this is basically a trilogy. It's basically 3 books. It says 1, 2, and 3 books, and it's long enough to be 1, 2, and 3 books, and all 3 books are distinctly different. And my issue is that if you sold it as a trilogy, I think all 3 books would have serious issues. Book 1, a huge amount of setting up characters, because every time we meet a character, you meet the character by, alright, it's this person's perspective, now they're going to think about their backstory for 5 pages, and there's a lot of characters, so that's a lot of pages of backstory. And then for book 2, not very much happens, and then book 3 has a lot of Deus Ex Machina. So that, and I also just didn't get along that well with Stephen King's writing style. I am going to try a shorter Stephen King book. I'm not just going to quit after The Stand, but man, a lot of people have this as their favorite Stephen King book, and this was not super encouraging. I didn't dislike it. If you told me you're only allowed a 1-word answer, did you like The Stand or dislike it? I would say I liked it, but barely. So this got a 5.8 out of 10. And I really this was a slog to get through. And I know I'm not someone who normally has problems with big books. You'll see that on my favorite books list of the year. There's some big books on there. And the Stormlight books. Anyway, yeah. So this probably has pushed King farther down my TBR. Probably won't get to him until 2022, because I read what a lot of people said was his best book and was very, very mixed on it. But let's move on to the far less controversial number 8, but it will also be an author who's also going to be on my top list. So let's see it.
When will you learn, West, that work is no substitute for talent?
So, coming in for the number 8 spot, from one of my favorite currently working authors is the short story collection Sharp Ends by Joe Abercrombie. This had a couple stories in here I really liked, but most of the short stories I would describe as one or two of two things. It felt like either chapter 1 of an interesting book, but then it's just like a hook, and then it's yep, that's it. So left me kind of it unsatisfied. Or it just takes an event from a much better book. And it's hey, here's this other point of view character, so you can see it from other things, which sometimes was kind of interesting, and sometimes was kind of not. There was one from the Heroes involving Gorst that I thought was pretty good. And this did have some, I'd say 3 short stories that I really liked, but that's out of 8 or 9. And that was the first one, which is not from the point of view of, but about a young Glokta. I mean, anything Glokta for me is just an automatic thumbs up. There's a strong correlation between Glokta being in a first law book and that first law book getting at least a 9 out of 10. There was one from the point of view of Temple during the events of Before They Are Hanged. And I really like Temple. He's not one of my favorite Joe Abercrombie characters, but that's because Joe Abercrombie characters are an extremely high bar. He's a character I really enjoy. And then there's a very popular one, that's the last one, that I don't really like at all. And it's from the point of view of Bethid. And I really like what it did with Bethid's character, but I don't like at all what it did with Logan's character. Because it was supposed to reframe the way we see Logan's character, but to me all it did was make Logan's character less interesting. And I wish I'd never read it. Now I think if I reread the First Law trilogy, I think Logan might be less interesting. It also has an entire series of short stories following a character named Chev, who I just don't care about that much. There's one that has Warren of the Blight, who's great, and that short story was also good, but a lot of these were just lackluster. It has the dollar store. Joe Abercrombie has the thing where like he'll follow multiple point of views as they die. It has the dollar store version of that. Like it's still Joe Abercrombie, so there's some things that it's still gonna nail. Like I laughed multiple times. He nails the dry humor. It's got Glockta in it, so it automatically can't be less than 3 stars because Glockta equals default. I like the book, even if he's only in the first story. That's just how it works. Sorry. Best first law character, one of my favorite characters of all time. It's just how it works. He's always the master of voice where everyone feels distinctive, but there's really a lot of short stories here that were very meh. So, same rating as The Stand, also got a 5.8 out of 10. I basically flipped a coin for which one got 8 and which one got 9. I don't know which one I like more. This had Glockta, but that has Nick. Who knows? Anyway. Let's move on to book number 7.
Fuck the old way. Fuck the new way. As he had always been, he himself would be the third way. He would be himself, and he would be terrible.
Alright, so we have another big book. We have The Burning White by Brent Weeks as the number 7, my 7th least favorite book I read this year. The Burning White is actually, hint, it's not my least favorite book in the series. And that's because up to, like, here, probably, there, like, the first 2/3, pretty solid. I don't like the first 2/3 as much as I like book 1 through 3, but there's a character who kind of does nothing for 2 books, and he's my favorite character in books 1 and 2, and he does things in this book, which is great. And Tia, a late edition, actually is my favorite Lightbringer character, and her plot takes this book, and she puts it on her back, and she just carries it into me still overall liking it more than I dislike it. But man, that last third, it feels like a different author wrote the last third. Like the shift in tone and like the way the world works just went out the window. Also, Brent Weeks likes to subvert your expectations more than any other author I've ever encountered to a hilarious degree. And he does it so much that at this point, it's incredibly predictable. So, like, if you have some of the stuff in this book as your first ever Brent Weeks read, it might not bother you that much. But when I just read 4 and he's just doing all the same things, it ends up the ultimate combination of predictable and not satisfying. Like, at least when you go with what the expectations are, then you have setup and payoff. And it's like, great, at least it's satisfying, even if I saw it coming. When you subvert it, you lose the setup, but you get the unpredictability. But here it's predictable and not satisfying for a lot of the times. Like, there's one scene, and this happens a lot in Lightroom. It's like, oh, there's this impossible task, and I'm like, they're going to succeed at the impossible thing and then fail because of something trivial, aren't they? And yeah, that's what happens, because that's what happens every time in Lightbringer, always. And then the last third is just a ridiculous mess of plot conveniences and not... It's weird. Brent Weeks is really good at setting things up, and then he never pays off the things he sets up. He's like, psych, I'm going to do something else. And then for his big payoffs, he doesn't set them up. Didn't set it up at all. But... man, the last third, just so many baffling choices. Because, like, the first 2/3 of this book, solid. I was like, because you'll see it, I did not like the Bloodmere. But, 2/3 into this book, I was like, this is a solid recovery. Maybe not as good as book 2 or 3, but it's like a 7.5, 8 out of 10. And then, man, it's not. I guess some people might have been okay with the choices in the ending, but I thought they were a mess. And the problem is the internally consistent logic. Like, there's some things where it's like, okay, but you could have done these things earlier, and I don't see a good reason why not. Yeah. I will say, it's a Lightbringer book, so the combat and magic system's great. I also am not a huge fan of Andros Guile. Everyone else seems to love Andros Guile. I've always found, to me, he didn't actually do smart things. Brent Weeks just would maneuver things to make him right, whether he deserved it or not. To me, his intelligence never felt deserved. I think it says a lot about this book that it came ripped, and I didn't care. I was just like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. Anyway, that's the conclusion of Lightbringer, which is still overall a good series, but there's so many series that didn't flop the ending that it's hard to recommend over Lightbringer. Like, if it was the same quality as books 1 through 3 for the entire 5, Lightbringer would be up there with, like, Faithful and the Fallen for how much I like the series, but the ending of Faithful and the Fallen is great, and the ending of this I don't really like that much at all, so we're gonna move on to the next spot on the list.
I'm a little old-fashioned, she continued, but I've become accustomed to having the exclusive use of certain things. Like a toothbrush, let's say, my private chambers, library, and toilet, and the Fisher King. Do not, please, to avail yourself of the Fisher King.
At this point, you're gonna learn I don't have a one book per author rule for either the top list or the bottom list. If you write enough good books and I read in a year and you're an author, you can have 5 books in a list, but if you write multiple books I don't like, I still don't quite, this one is getting close though. Then yeah, you can have multiple books on my bottom list. So, The Lady of the Lake, by Andrzej Sapkowski. It's a mess of an ending in my opinion. I don't think the ending is, I don't dislike the ending as much as the ending of Lightbringer, but the problem is I don't like it doesn't have Tia or the Great Magic System, and the other stuff isn't as good. So, I will say, when this book follows Geralt, and to a lesser Ciri at times, but especially Geralt, it's great. But he bit off. There's like a bunch of, it's a fantasy book. There's a big battle in the last book. And it's from the point of view of a character we've never met before. Like, I have to give credit, that's a bold choice. I also don't think it's a good choice, is my problem. There's also, it really feels like some decisions are made, where there was no clear way to advance the plot. So the author was like, whatever, this person needs to be there, so they're going there. Does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense at all. But they need to be there, or book doesn't work. So, send them. And the last issue I had with this book was the previous book I really liked. It's my Witcher hot take. It's my favorite book in the series. And the ending of it was great. And then means the beginning of this book basically ruins the ending of the previous book, which didn't lower my rating of the previous book. That's not the previous book's fault. It's this book's fault. So, yeah, this book has a lot of weird stuff and really has way more characters than it should. I feel like this is does as much POV hopping as something like Wheel of Time does, but it's not nearly as focused, and the character motivations are sometimes ignored, and also the internal logic for when a character can use magic, it really seems like they're magic when the plot needs them to be magic. So this was, I think my rating for this was 5.5 out of 10. So we're getting pretty close to negative ratings. The thing that keeps it positive is it's Geralt and Ciri and Dandelion. When we're following them, the book is good. And it has really good parts that I enjoyed, and those parts carry it to me still overall liking the book, despite the huge list of issues. So I have one more book that's technically positive, and then we're going to move on to books that I actually dislike. One of which is a DNF, but I read 350 pages of it. Whatever. We're moving on to number 5.
That's what being free means. Not the right to do whatever you want, but the right to take a stand and say what you'll die for.
I do not have a physical copy of the next book on this list because I read it on a Kindle. because it was really cheap on Kindle. But number 5 is Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell. This is one of those books where really some things I liked about it. And it really had potential for me to like it way more. But it just pissed away that potential in the last third. And there's like 3 or 4 things that just kill it for me and bring it down to a highly mediocre book that I would very rarely recommend to people. Basically, like, if you want a fun book to turn your brain off, it can be good, but man, it's got some issues. So we're going to talk about what I liked about it first. Falkio, especially in this book, love following Falkio. It's a great protagonist. Combat, action in this book is fantastic. Sebastian de Castell writes really good action. I actually think, I read book 2, then I stopped the series. I actually think the action in this book has more really good action scenes than book 2, in my opinion. And the relationships between kind of the 3 musketeers and their banter is really, really solid. And Sebastian de Castell's funny. And those are all pretty significant pros that would make it hard for a book with all of those pros to be my 5th least favorite book of the year. But here we go. So, we're going to start with my thing I care about the least, and we're going to increase the intensity of the rant. That's the plan here. So there are some books where, you've got a plot, you need to get to a destination. There's some books that take the most direct path. And there are some books that wander. And I'm fine with either of these. The Way of Kings wanders. And I just bought a really expensive version of it because it's one of my favorite books ever. But having a plot that wanders back and forth in like a 300-page book, that's a bold strategy, Cotton. Especially since there's some teleport. There's wandering, and then it's like, oh crap, we're over here and we need to be over here. Well, we got to go over there. So I don't know if the plot is actually like coherent. Like, there's just a bunch of stuff that you do, and then you get to the next thing, and it's like, wait, what the hell was the point of that? And it's like some of the fun things, like some of the best parts of the book are just there for, like, they don't actually really accomplish much for the plot of this book. And it's kind of all over the place. And that brings me to the next thing, and that's, like, internally consistent logic. Very, very, very unclear for the fantasy elements on how it works or what certain characters' motivations are. It's really all over the place. Like, some people don't care about internally consistent logic. They just like magic. And I'm like, if your logic is going to be, yeah, this person can just do whatever, that's fine. But then you can't also have a situation in the past where that character could have done so, like, obviously they had the abilities, they could have interfered and helped, and they just didn't. So, like, your logic can be the character can do whatever, but then you have to consider the implications of your character. There isn't a character that's omniscient, but you can have super loose rules, and I don't care, but you have to, if you don't consider the implications of your super loose rules, then I do care, and it's going to bother me. And now the 2 biggies that kill it for me. These 2 issues would have been like 7 out of 10 books still. Maybe 6 point something out of 10 books. Still fun book. Probably would have recommended it to people. But the last 2, and that is, holy crap, there's a lot of Deus Ex Machina in this book. Like, a truly stunning amount of Deus Ex Machina. Like, multiple. Not even just one. It's just like, so I don't know if you guys know, the YouTube series is called Pitch Meetings. And it's like, it's just one person talking to himself. And it's like, he says an idea for like what would happen in a movie. And then the person hearing the pitch for the movie, like, asks questions about how that makes no sense. And then the guy's like, well, there needs to be a movie. And the guy's like, yeah, sure. The final half of this book, I want to see a pitch meeting for it. Because it would be like, well, there's all these completely impossible situations. Like, how are you going to deal with it? Oh, super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Just for all of them. Like, there's so many. It's like impossible situations. They're totally screwed. And none of them are a challenge. They just knock him out. back to back to back with no setup, things that just come out of nowhere, and I don't care that they get explained later. Getting explained in the middle of book 4 for Deus Ex Machina in book 1 is still a Deus Ex Machina, and I say this for books I like too. There's a Deus Ex Machina in the Final Empire. I know what's going on there now, but when you read it, it's a Deus Ex Machina. And goddamn, there's some it totally ruined my enjoyment of the book for me. Like, I was having fun, I was like, yeah, whatever, this is a fun romp, who cares, internal consistency, whatever. The plot's going, I don't care. It's a fun book, Falkio's fun. And then I was just like, all right, what the hell was that? Like, you set up, you had potential for a great conclusion, and it's just, I think I'm spoiled by people like Jim Butcher, Jim Butcher puts the characters in impossible situations, but then comes up with really, really smart ways for them to get out of it. And after they do it, you're like, oh, holy crap, like, that totally makes sense. Like, they could have done that. I wasn't smart enough to see that way out of it. So it's like, so that isn't Traitor's Blade. This is an impossible situation, and then Sebastian de Castell says, psych, it's fine. Anyway, and then, the last thing is a combination of a character named Athalia and the handling of sexual assault and rape in this book. And that is that there's a rape in this book that's treated like not rape. And like the author has said, he didn't intend it to be a rape scene. It's a rape scene. Like, and also like there's this stereotypical like of he's got like a wife character, and it's like, oh, they killed and raped her, and that's kind of like a main motivator. So it's, but like, I actually, that doesn't bother me as much as some people, because like when it's the other way, I'm like, if someone's like best friend dies, no one's like, oh, you fridged your best friend. So it's like, yeah, sometimes people you care about dying, you care. So that one didn't bother me quite as much, but the rape scene also just Athalia in general, it's gotta be one of my least favorite characters in all of fiction. No, I read Wizard's First Rule this year. Still, like, any tier list, if you make any tier list of characters for me to make, and it has Athalia, she's going in D tier. Maybe, okay, it'd be hard not to, but it'd be impressive. Anyway, but I still went on to book 2, despite that big rant, because of the stuff I said front. Falkio was a great protagonist. Everyone said book 2 was way better. It had so much potential. And I'm going to talk about book 2 later on this list. So, most people like Night Shadows more. I'm definitely the outlier, but, you'll see what I think of Night Shadow soon. And, well, I didn't read book 3, but we'll get back to that. Let's head on to the next book, where I will once again make everyone angry at me. Let's go. So, unfortunately, I was completely unable to be concise. So I am going to have to split this into 2 videos, because after editing it all together, it was an hour and 2 minutes for everything. So, I guess now with these added bits, it'll be a bit more in total, but you will get the last 4, the books I actually disliked, not the books I liked with a bunch of asterisks, in the near future. That'll be it for this video. I hope everyone enjoyed. Let me know, I guess, your 10 through 5 for the year least favorite books, or just, how your disappointing books of the year in the comments below. Bye, everyone.